Your script is operating in a space that very few tennis creators even attempt anymore. Most sports content online is transactional. Match recap, rankings update, injury news, surface analysis, quick reactions. What you're building here is mythology. That is why the script feels emotionally massive even when it becomes repetitive. You are not merely documenting the rise of Alexandra Eala. You are constructing an entire narrative ecosystem around her rise. One where tennis becomes the vehicle for discussing identity, migration, globalization, aspiration, fandom, and generational change. That is an extremely powerful lane to occupy as a creator because audiences no longer just consume sports. They consume meaning. They want stories that make events feel historically important while they are still unfolding. Your script understands that instinct better than most tennis commentary channels on YouTube. But the reason this matters so much is because you are sitting right on the edge between two very different outcomes. A legendary long-form sports documentary voice or content that begins sounding exaggerated and repetitive enough that viewers emotionally disconnect, and the difference between those two outcomes is not passion. You already have passion. It is restraint. The strongest sports documentaries in the world are never loud all the time. They rise and fall emotionally. They know when to whisper. They know when to pause. They know when to let a single detail carry more weight than 10 declarations ever could. Right now, your script often chooses escalation over precision. Every paragraph tries to sound like the climax. That creates emotional fatigue. Think about the structure of elite narration in sports documentaries. Whether it's basketball, Formula One, football, or tennis, the most memorable narration usually follows this rhythm. Observation, implication, emotional insight, payoff. Your script sometimes skips the observation stage and jumps straight to "this changes everything." That's why some sections feel repetitive even though the subject itself is compelling. For example, when you describe crowds following Eala around the world, the instinct is to say, "The entire tennis world is in shock." But that sentence is weaker than specifics. This, "Practice courts in Dubai were filling an hour before she arrived," is stronger than, "She has become the biggest star in tennis." This, "Tournament organizers had to reconsider outer court scheduling," is stronger than, "She is redefining the sport." This, "Opponents were walking into atmospheres that felt closer to Davis Cup ties than second-round WTA matches," is stronger than, "Nobody has ever seen anything like this." Details create belief. Belief creates emotion. Emotion creates hype naturally. That is the biggest evolution your writing needs now. Another important point is credibility architecture. Your narration style is intentionally cinematic. That's good. Sports audiences love cinematic storytelling now, especially younger audiences raised on Netflix sports docs, TikTok edits, emotional athlete storytelling, dramatic narration channels, legacy narratives. But cinematic narration only works if the audience trusts the narrator. The second viewers begin feeling, "Okay, this sounds too exaggerated," the emotional immersion weakens. This is especially important with tennis audiences because tennis fans are unusually analytical compared to many sports audiences. They track rankings, match stats, surfaces, draws, and historical comparisons obsessively. If you overstate too often, part of the audience mentally exits the story. For example, most popular player on earth, billions, internet stops, wealthiest athlete in sports by connection. WTA completely shocked. These lines sound huge, but they also weaken trust because they sound impossible to verify. The smarter move is strategic implication. Instead of, "She is the most popular player in the world," say, "Few players on the WTA tour right now generate this level of emotional response across continents." That line feels sophisticated, measured, professional, and ironically, it sounds more powerful because it feels believable. One of the most interesting things about your script is that the best sections are actually the quietest sections. The strongest material isn't global takeover, history changing, world shocked. The strongest material is Philippine flags in stadiums, fans traveling across countries, practice courts filling up, opponents feeling crowd pressure. The Nadal Academy connection, Eala learning to embrace expectation, left-handed patterns on slow courts, crowd noise echoing in Indian wells. Those are real images. Real images stay in people's heads. That is where your writing becomes elite. You also instinctively understand something most creators miss completely. Sports popularity in 2026 is no longer only about trophies. That's a genuinely intelligent insight. You repeatedly touch on this idea, that modern sports fame is now built from identity, relatability, authenticity, cultural symbolism, online engagement, emotional accessibility, narrative momentum. That's true. And Alexandra Eala is actually a very strong subject for that kind of storytelling because her appeal naturally intersects Southeast Asian representation, diaspora, identity, women's sports growth, youth culture, social media amplification, Nadal Academy, prestige, underdog psychology. You're identifying the right themes. Where the script becomes weaker is when it tries too hard to conclude every theme with, therefore she has changed the entire sport forever. You don't need to force the conclusion. The audience will arrive there themselves if the storytelling is convincing enough. One of the most powerful techniques in sports narration is allowing viewers to feel intelligent. When viewers connect the dots themselves, the story feels bigger. For example, instead of saying, "The sport will never be the same again," you can say, "Tournament directors are already adjusting schedules around her audience." That single sentence implies transformation without announcing it directly. That's sophisticated storytelling. Another thing worth discussing is pacing. Right now, the script has almost no recovery zones emotionally. It's all crescendo. Elite long-form narration needs contrast. Intensity, calm, detail, reflection, tension, release. Without that rhythm, the audience becomes numb to the emotional peaks. Imagine this structure. Big crowd, chaos, fast narration. Energy, movement. Then suddenly, 3 years earlier, she was practicing in Mallorca, wondering if she even belonged at this level. That emotional contrast creates gravity. The audience leans in. Your script has enough material for that kind of rhythm, but currently, it keeps accelerating instead of breathing. Another major strength, you naturally understand audience psychology. You consistently frame Eala as underestimated, emotionally grounded, hardworking, culturally significant, mentally resilient. That combination is incredibly effective online because modern sports fandom increasingly revolves around emotional identification rather than simple winning. Fans want athletes who feel symbolic. That's exactly why the diaspora angle in your script works so well. Not because it's marketing, because it's human. The idea that people far from home see themselves in her journey is emotionally compelling. That is much stronger than repeatedly saying, "She is the biggest athlete in the world." The emotional identification already explains the popularity. One thing I would strongly recommend: add more vulnerability. Right now, the narration often portrays Eala almost like an unstoppable mythological figure. But audiences emotionally bond through vulnerability. Imagine lines like, "There were moments earlier in her career where the losses felt heavier because she knew millions were watching," or "Learning how to carry expectation may have become her greatest skill." That kind of writing deepens the character dramatically, because legends without vulnerability feel fictional. Legends with vulnerability feel real. Another thing, your tennis analysis sections are actually excellent when they stay technical. The parts discussing lefty serve patterns, return positioning, slow hard courts, clay, adjustment, crowd pressure, tactical maturity, those sections elevate the script above generic fan narration. You should expand those sections more, because they create legitimacy. When audiences hear real tactical insight, they trust the emotional storytelling more. Right now the ratio is 80% mythology, 20% tennis analysis. A better ratio might be 60% mythology, 40% actual tennis substance. That balance would massively improve authority. And finally, the biggest opportunity here. You're not just building videos around Alexandra Eala. You are building a narrative identity for your channel. That matters, because audiences return to creators who make sports feel cinematic. You already have atmosphere, emotional scale, symbolic framing, pacing, instincts, strong imagery, dramatic hooks. Now the evolution is refinement. Less repetition, fewer absolute claims, more precision, more vulnerability, more tactical detail, more emotional contrast. If you develop that discipline, your storytelling style could genuinely stand out in the tennis space because very few creators combine documentary, narration, emotional sports, mythology, cultural analysis, tactical understanding in the same package. That's why the script still works despite its flaws. The foundation is strong, the ambition is real, and the emotional instincts are absolutely there.